So I've been meaning to make this video for a while now. Unfortunately, I haven't really been able to find a suitable place to do my videos in. And so you'll have to put up with the wind, the noise from the wind, and all of those things for the time being. I think that a lot of people may think it's really weird that how is it possible that why am I so stubbornly resistant to a partnership, right? Because again, just to reiterate, right, you're basically screwed in the particular situation that I was in and I am in. That if you don't have family, that the only people that would actually help you meaningfully, substantively, are people that with whom you have a commitment, right? And what kind of commitments exist in society apart from long-term relationships or like marital bonds or like those kinds of social ties, right? If you don't have a supportive family, you're basically screwed. And so my choice not to look for a mate or to shut that off completely has had a huge impact on my life, obviously. So it seems at times like I'm maddeningly, it's like a quirk of mine.
What I wanted to say is simply that if I had done the ordinary thing and looked for a mate, that would have removed me from my situation and it would have been game over as far as the truth of my dad's death was concerned. And so can you really knock me for my decision, right? For this quirk of mine that society deems as a defect and for which I have paid, the full price for, right? Why should anyone ever have to enter into a relationship or do anything that they don't want to in order to get their basic needs or their rights met? Do you know what I mean? You could say on the surface that may sound even a little bratty, but it really isn't. Because what it's doing is it creates the conditions for abuse to happen because it makes you beholden to others for things that are a universal requirement for life and the flourishing of life. It's placing a lot of power and control in hands where it doesn't belong. Because it doesn't matter how benevolent or generous your captor is, they're still your captor. The simple fact of things like peace and quiet, solitude and privacy, but more precisely, the freedom, the sanctuary, the freedom from the oppress of other people, specifically their judgment, for example, of which there's no shortage of here. I mean, I don't know, rights and privileges that belong to everyone, right? Those things can only be found in town, in places such as your home or your car. Well, where does that place a person, someone like me, a friendless chick who lacks both car and home? But in every other way, I deserve to have those acquisitions as much as anyone else, right? Especially given the fact that I have worked for it, fair and square and that kind of thing. That's the product of a society where everybody thinks only of themselves when they're making decisions from their perspective, that is. A society that planned around servicing the narcissist and gratifying their whims and needs and their fancies while making a mockery of everyone else. That's what I mean.
How'd I put it? So hard to put this. Even in the best conditions, that I'm trying to do it in a busy park in the middle of the inner city, downtown, east side. I mean, but that's just the best that I can find, I guess. I guess the best that they have to give to me, I guess. They have to offer me, if you want to be cynical about it, but whatever. It doesn't matter because I am no stranger to the ways of people. Anyway, but I don't want to get off topic too much. What I mean is that this has to do with my dad, specifically what my dad knew right before he died. And an interaction that we had right before he died that was very significant. And just really quickly, in a nutshell, if you will recall, like about a couple months before my dad died, right? We had a break-in, and following the break-in, I accompanied him to the neighborhood meeting that they had called, everyone had called in alarm just to talk about how to keep the neighborhood safe and everything. And that turned out to be a very impactful event as far as the effect that it had on my dad, because I remember walking back from that meeting with my dad and I felt so helpless, that the way my dad had stormed out and I just kind of followed him, kind of like a little mouse, and I was pretty embarrassed, but I still wanted to show my dad, solidarity and support. So I remember saying to my dad in a kind of meek, soft kind of voice, kind of like helplessly saying to him that Dad, I didn't like the way those people talked to you, right? And I remember my dad kind of not even barely paying any attention. His mind was elsewhere, but he kind of acknowledged what I said and he just kind of nodded or something. But his mind was somewhere else. And now, looking back, I can only imagine like what he was thinking about, what he was facing at the time was what he was thinking about was what the heck was he gonna do? Because he knew he was about to die. He knew he had only a couple months left to live, a couple weeks left to live. And who was gonna be the one to vindicate him, or who was gonna be there to tell his truth, right? There was that account, and then there was another time, right? This is important too, because I think that it had an effect on him equally in conjunction and in combination with this, what happened, all of these little events, or that we shared, that all together combined like made an impression on him, a big impression on him. The second one was when I was sitting with my dad in the car, and I remember that he was muttering over something. He was in a bad mood, and so was I. And he was muttering about something, and I kind of just like let out a big, kind of an exasperated kind of like, I can't take it anymore. I can't take any more of this stuff from you guys. I can't endure any more of this. And my dad seemed seriously surprised, because he was like, what do you have to be worried about? What do you have to worry about? That was the first time it kind of maybe dawned on my dad that I might have, that I wasn't completely in my mom's confidences. What does that mean? So it means like I wasn't completely, didn't have the wool completely over my eyes. She didn't have me completely in the palm of her hand. So, right. So fast forward to about a month, about 3 months before my dad's death, right? My mom decided that following the meeting, that she would relocate, move all of us, because she lived separately. She would move my dad and me and my two brothers to a new townhome, right? So to commemorate, or like to kind of like mark that moment, she invited us to have dinner at her apartment. And that dinner, turned out to be pretty remarkable, because I can't explain what happened, but that something did happen between me and my dad. So I was sitting on one end of the table, and my dad was sitting on the opposite end at the far end of the table. So, and I don't know what it was that we were finishing up dinner. My mom was not seated. She was elsewhere, but it was just, I don't know, but I was picking at my food and then just looking at my plate. And then I happened to look up and I met my dad's gaze. That is to say, like, I noticed that he was looking at me very intently, like he was watching my face, studying my face in a way that I'd never seen him do that. He was just studying my face very intently. And I remember my response was like, because I'm not proud of it, but I said, had a little bit of an attitude. I said, what? And my dad just kind of averted his eyes. Yeah. But that was it. That was the whole interaction. But something deeper was communicated between us. Something telepathically was communicated between us. Because as I distinctly recall, as I got up from the table, right? Distinctly recall this phrase that popped into my head saying, Jacqueline will understand one day. Jacqueline will understand it one day. As if this had been transmitted from my dad to me at the dinner table that day. And after that dinner, and after that very significant moment when we met eyes, right? My dad's entire demeanor changed drastically. It was like a load had been lifted off his shoulders, and the air around him had lightened up. It just seemed like he was a lot more at peace with things. Like he had accepted, like he felt like he felt like he could leave. Like he had been released from his the need to ties here, that he had been freed to a certain extent, that he was free to go. And I know that it was probably after this that he went and bought himself a white linen suit, because he knew himself to be victorious. And I think that it had everything to do with what I had, the impression that I made on him with what I did, Somehow he knew, I don't know how he knew, but he knew that as long as Jacqueline was around, my mom was never going to get away with anything. I don't know how he knew that 15 years later, I would be sitting before you and talking about him and the story about him and my mom and stuff, but here I am. He couldn't have predicted that I would do something as insane as stick around in a hopeless situation out of faith and dutifulness and loyalty and all of that. But what it required of me was completely out of all, beyond what anyone could ever ask their kid to do. And yet I spontaneously, without prompting, ended up doing just that, is what I mean. That's what I'm trying to convey to you guys. That the idea, the predestination, the idea of fatedness and destiny, all of that has some truth to it. But then there's one more thing, and the fact that my mom, that the levity, that the sense of like the air of peace that surrounded my dad, like right after that dinner, right? Something that even my mom picked up on, because immediately after my dad died, we were all gathered in the kitchen. We were talking about my dad, just reminiscing. And I distinctly remember my mom. What did she say? She said like, "Oh, It's such a shame that your dad went so suddenly. We were just starting to get along. He was starting to mellow out. You know, we weren't bickering and arguing all the time. Such a shame it went so suddenly. And I know that my brothers can confirm this because we're all there, and that's just exactly what my mom said. There are other things. I mean, in terms of like how certain I am that my mother is guilty of killing my dad. Like, I'm 100% convinced. 100% convinced, but I don't really want to overload this video. What I just want to say is that there's a lot that I've been trying to reconcile, like this, the final days of my dad's life with what's going on now. It's like he predicted this, but he couldn't possibly have predicted this. But whatever he saw that day, he saw in me, it was enough to satisfy him, like to give him the peace that he needed to leave this world, knowing that he will be vindicated and that it would be me. My guess is that he knew my character. He raised me and he knew my character, how diligent and dutiful and loyal I am. But even so, like this, I find it pretty remarkable because I walked into this completely oblivious. I mean, I've had premonitions, including that premonition that I received, that Jacqueline will understand. She'll understand everything one day. That was what was relayed to me, like transmitted to me from my dad that day. Because I distinctly remember that was what was said. Wordlessly, that is, but yeah, I mean, my parents knew me for what I am, what I was. Even my mother would compare me to a little puppy dog that you could mistreat and yell at, kick, and do all sorts of awful things to it. But then it was so pure-hearted and so loving that it would never hold a grudge against you, that you couldn't shake him off if he wanted to. And she would maybe go off on its own for a little bit and then nurse its wounds or whatever, and then it'll come back and just wanting to be next to them. You'll be next to you again or something. I mean, the point is that I was just an exceptionally loving, devoted child. So I think both my parents knew what to expect from me. But even so, like, this is above and beyond. This even shocks me. So I hope that I've conveyed at least the magic. I think it's pretty magical. Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that my dad knew. My dad got all the assurance he needed that day at the dinner table that he could count on me, and that he didn't have to worry. He didn't have to worry about the truth never being uncovered, because as long as I was around, somebody was around to stay the course and not leave a situation when it got very uncomfortable. And it did get very uncomfortable. That my mom couldn't possibly get away with it, because that's her whole MO is to remove people, drive them away by any means necessary. And most people, would put their own selfish ambitions over what they believe, what they know, or what the call of their conscience, or whatever, what is right, or whatever. But I'm not most people. But I think that, the fact that my dad had such, conviction and faith in what I would become and what I would do for him in that moment, I think says a lot. So that's all I wanted to say today. Hopefully I did an okay job at explaining this pretty significant episode of my personal life. Thank you for listening.